Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ophthalmology Business Podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I'm Guido Paquette, one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of the podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy at www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Troy Cole, Catalyst and Chief at LogiCole Consulting, LLC, about the 4 most common limiting beliefs that are capping your premium conversions. Let's jump in. What's up, Troy? How you doing?
Yo, I'm doing great, man. How you doing, Guido?
Doing excellent. I think I was really hoping that I could get you on this podcast because I see your messages going out on social media. I see your emails, and a lot of what you say resonates. So I'm excited to talk to you today and pick your brain. As you know, there's ups and downs in the premium conversions when you talk about cataract premium conversions, LASIK conversions, and just in general, how different practices approach that challenge. So I think you're a great person to pick your brain. And so thanks again for joining me today. But could you start off just by telling the podcast audience a little bit about yourself and how did you get into the space of ophthalmology?
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite, man. I've been excited about this one. So I'm Troy Cole. I've been in the ophthalmology space for almost 20 years now, which sounds kind of crazy coming out of my mouth. I started at a marketing firm where we were full service working with elective surgeons, a lot of LASIK and cataract surgeons, and then started my own consultancy about 7 years ago. And we work with practices on their marketing strategy and a lot around the communications and the sales aspect of ophthalmology. I know that the S word can be a little bit triggering for some folks. We'll talk about that. But that's my role. And then my wife, Susan, also works with me here at the firm. And her background is she's got marketing experience on the agency side. She was also a refractive counselor for many years. And then she went on to work for one of the big pharmaceutical groups, slinging drugs to ophthalmologists. So we come at this with different experience and different viewpoints from really all over the industry, which helps us to really understand our clients' concerns and their challenges and get in and help them craft the solutions that they need.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you said the S word, sales. So I was having a conversation about this earlier with someone about, how much should you put a focus on sales versus patient care? I sat and I thought about it. I was like, they're not mutually exclusive. Right? When you're approaching the patients and offering them the right options, we use the word sales because it's the process of it, but really the better that we do on the business side, it gives the doctor the opportunity to see more patients and give great patient care. So there's really not, you don't have to separate them, right? I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. It's a word that in our coaching programs, I say, look, if you don't like the word sales, just pretend it's a different word. Education, leadership, right? These are all synonyms for the way we do sales. Sales in and of itself is neutral, right? It's how you apply it. Well, there's used car salesman. That's probably a negative way to apply it, right? But we've all had sales experiences where at the end of it, we were like, man, that person really helped me to make a good decision, buy a good product, and I'm really happy with this. And I'm glad that salesperson did a good job to get me where I am right now. That's what we're going for. So I don't care what you call it, but that's the result that we're trying to get with our patients.
Yeah, it's how you get there, right? And the person that helped you get there.
Exactly. So look, if you're tuning in right now and you're like, sales, click, hey, stick around. Okay. Yeah. Stick around because you're going to like what we got to say.
All right. Well, let's jump into the topic. So when we started looking at, the 4 most common limiting beliefs, I think when we talk about each one in detail, there are a lot of preconceptions about these. So these are going to be good water cooler topics to talk about that I think that people are going to have a little debate on these things. So I'm glad that you challenge those preconceptions, because if you just sit back in the in your ways of, well, this is this way, and that's not, I can't change it. Well, then you're limiting your growth potential, your practice. So let's start with the first one. So, which I think is probably the hottest topic in terms of debate. A salesperson is a natural born talent, and it's not a learnable skill. So why don't you tell us where on the side of the fence you fall on that comment?
Yeah. So sales, is it a talent that you're born with, or is it a skill that you can learn? And I was having a conversation with some friends last week. We were hanging out by the pool and just shooting the breeze, and they're both salespeople. And they're like, look, man, you can't train salespeople. They just got it or they don't. And of course, Susan and I are sitting there laughing, because it's like, we literally do this week in, week out with people all over the country who would not consider themselves to be salespeople. And so what we found is that the way that we coach our clients to sell, the way we were talking about through leadership, right? Those are some very, very teachable skills. And it really starts with understanding what your job role is, right? So let's take anybody in your practice, understanding what their job role is. If you have someone who thinks my job is to answer the phones, my job is to answer questions, then that is a limiting belief that's keeping them from actually doing what they need to do with the folks that are coming into your office or calling you on the phone. They are leaders. The people in your practice, whatever their job role is, are leaders within that specific job role. If you call 911, 911's not saying like, hey, yeah, so do you have any questions? Like, what can I answer for you? No, they're taking charge of the situation. They're asking you what's going on, and they are diagnosing and telling you exactly what's going to happen. They're coming to the rescue. That's more of how we need to think about what our role is in the practice versus just answering questions. I do scans. I just schedule people. It's a leadership concept. So that's really what the first shift is.
Yeah. And I like the way that you approach that, because I think it's teaching each person that is part of that process. And maybe it's a different way to communicate. And maybe you don't have to use the word sales. Maybe it's better communication, right? It's simple. And simple things like that you can change the mindset. Let me ask you this though, okay? So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. Okay. So all these practices who are looking to hire great salespeople for their practices, it can be a challenge. Like, I can tell you, even us personally, it is tough. It seems really tough to get the right fit for the role. So what would be your advice then for practices that are, especially in this climate today, post-COVID, it's hard to hire people. There's a lot of jobs available, a little less now, maybe this year, but it's still there though. Like, what is your advice then? If you said we can take somebody who maybe has the right personality, and maybe they're not a natural balance salesperson, like how would we approach then hiring, in this concept?
Well, you can teach people how to do scans. You can teach them about eyes, right? And there's a little bit of a learning curve there, but you can teach that. And you can teach sales like we just talked about. What you can't teach, or what's very hard to teach, is personality. You just hit the nail on the head. It is that positive personality, somebody who clearly is going above and beyond in their job role to either create a great experience for you or to provide great service. When you come across those folks, okay, this is the best tip I can give you. If you're sitting around waiting for someone to fill your job listing and get quality candidates like that, yeah, maybe you'll get some. But when you're out at your favorite restaurant and you've got a waiter, waitress, and they're doing an amazing job, they're walking you through the menu items, they're making you feel great, they're giving you a great experience, that's the person you need to offer a job to. That's the kind of thing that you're looking for. You can teach them eyes, man. It's not hard, right? But that personality, you take that and you apply that to what you're doing inside, that's going to be a quote unquote salesperson that you want on your team.
What do you think about like the process of effectively reaching everyone? So like, for example, I'm sure there's certain protocols for professional salespeople that once we have the initial conversation, I'm going to reach out, 7 days later or 3 days later, or text or whatever. So are you saying basically personality, find the right person, but all of that other stuff, we can teach that stuff, really is what you're saying, right? In a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying like if you're in a situation where there's a good salesperson that's bad. We all know salespeople. We have great salespeople in our lives. If you come across one, if your dude sells you a car and you think he was awesome, offer him a job. That's fine.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is like that personality, that's the first and foremost, because everybody listening right now knows how low the bar is in customer service right now. It's on the ground. Customer service in general is pretty garbage. And so people that I'm talking about stand out like a sore thumb, man. Give them an opportunity in your practice. They will surprise you with how they can perform.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, I mean, I'm tempted to keep talking about this, but we could keep talking about this topic forever. So let's move on to the second limiting belief that can happen in practice sometimes, which is that time equals conversion. So I think what you mean here, you can explain, but I've heard different surgeons or different people in the practice that some of the ones that have the best patient satisfaction are the ones that are in and out of the room. And then also the, vice versa too. I've seen where people, don't give great experience. So what does that mean? Time equals conversions. Can you explain it?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. What I'm talking about is that a lot of folks think that, oh, if I want to improve my premium conversions, I need to spend more time with my patients. So we coach a lot of providers. We'll talk to MDs, we'll talk to ODs. They're doing a lot of consults. They're seeing many patients a day. They're very busy, right? And so that common limiting belief is that like, well, I just don't have the time it takes to improve my conversions. Therefore, I just can't do it. Or I've got to schlep it off on the counselor and like, hopefully they can do the job. And that's typically met with mixed results. So my point is, and our observations of working with all these practices and just some of the best practices in the country is that time does not necessarily equal more conversions. Every minute you spend with someone doesn't mean you're going to go up a percentage point in the conversions, right? What people need, they need rapport and they need a level of trust and they need a level of certainty with your practice. Okay. That doesn't mean that by sitting there for 30 minutes, you're going to generate that. You may be spinning your wheels for 30 minutes, right? But what they need to experience, if we're going to zoom this out and say big picture, practically, how can you apply this in your practice? You want to be a well-oiled machine. And by that, I mean, you want to have a flow where the patient's not repeating the same information 3 or 4 or 5 times, where there's not a lot of lag or miscommunication between each individual person, right? Counselor knows what the tech does. Provider knows what the counselor said. Scheduler knows what the doctor just recommended. And that is getting documented throughout the process. We describe it like a relay race. I got the baton. I'm going to pass it to you. You know what I just did, Guido. You're going to take that baton. You're going to run the next leg and you're going to give it to the next person. Not only does that make you more efficient, but it also creates that scenario where the patient knows, man, these guys have this down to a science. These guys have a process. They know what they're doing. So it creates that reassurance with them.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and something that we just did recently, it sounds very, very similar, is doing just a workflow analysis from the time the patient, even before the time they're thinking about your practice, contact your practice, all the way post-surgery and beyond, and kind of looking at every touch point of that patient. And I think what we discovered is that there is, like you said, there's some redundancies there. Like you have one person might be telling them on the phone some information. The next person in the chain might be a surgery counselor or someone in the office giving them maybe the same information, maybe contradictory information. Maybe your forms are out of date. Maybe what you're saying is not consistent with your paperwork. It's just, I think we were surprised. I mean, and I feel like we're one of the premium practices out there, but we were surprised how much cleanup we had to do in that process. And when we did, because we wanted to streamline it, which I think, is going to help patients with their understanding. And because there's so much that we throw at them, right? Like they come in and we do this every day, but they don't. So they come in and we throw all this new information at them. We got to make it efficient, not necessarily, like I said, spending too much time with them might be contradictory or counterproductive because you're giving them all this information and you were hoping that they took away all of it and they took away none of it because you gave them too much. Right?
Yes. Yeah. I think we're about to get into that one, right?
Yeah.
Information overload.
So let's get into that. So the third, common limiting beliefs that are capping your premium conversions. To me, this one spoke. Education equals information overload. So when I saw this one, I thought about this TED talk that I've watched. His name was Barry Schwartz, called The Paradox of Choice. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes.
But it's really good because, he's saying that, the more, what's baked into our society is that the more choice that we have, the more freedom we have. And if you were to hear that, be like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, more choices you have, more freedom you have. But the reality in some situations, the more choice that we have and the more options that we have, it increases the opportunity cost and it subtracts away from the satisfaction of the choices that we would have made. So if you've got 10 different choices and you made one choice and you're really unsure about that choice, you're thinking to yourself, damn it, should I have chosen the other 9 things? Right. Yep. And you don't really have the expertise. So talk a little bit more about, that, and, give me what you think.
Yeah, well, this one is so common, man. And I love that you brought up the paradox of choice, because that's exactly right. We just don't realize that we're doing it, right? We think that education is answering every single question somebody throws in front of you. But like you just said, we do this every day. They've never done it. And so people come into your office and they do not know what to ask. So they just start asking stuff, asking things on the phone, asking things in the office. And we typically will sit there and answer the question and then say, what other questions do you have? And then they'll pull another random one out of their pocket and they'll throw that at you, right? Yeah. We feel like we're doing the right thing by catering to them, but in reality, we're letting them run themselves in circles and not advancing them and actually taking them down the path that they want to go on. Patients and people in general like to stay in their comfort zone, even though when what's good for us is outside of our comfort zone. So we've got to take them out of that, right? So education does not mean just answering every random question. It actually means pinpointing what the concerns are and addressing the concerns. So education is not answering questions, it's addressing concerns. And the biggest one, kind of going back to what we just talked about on number 2, which was the time equals conversions. You want to save a bunch of time and then also do the right type of education. Make sure that your docs are making a recommendation to the patient on what procedure they should have. We see this a lot. Yep. Where a patient, like, the cool thing is you guys have all these different modalities to fix vision. The flip side of that is now we're giving patients options and letting them pick.
That's right. He even says that actually in that TED talk. He said something like, in healthcare now, the doctor, instead of saying, here's what you need to do, says something like, well, here's option A, here are the risk and benefits. Here's option B, here are the risk and benefits. I don't think that makes that patient feel any more confident about what to choose. Like, you're the expert. Tell me what to do.
Exactly. And I know I get some pushback on this sometimes because it's like, well, they qualify for multiple procedures. Like, I don't want to take that option out of their hands. You don't have to. Make the recommendation based on 2 things: what they qualify for and what their individual personal goals are. So the recommendation is based on what you've told me, this is going to be the best procedure to get you to that outcome. This is what I'm recommending for you. Yeah, when they have that, they hear that from you and you tell them, go talk to the counselor, they're going to get you scheduled for that surgery. I can't wait to see you on surgery day. And they have that recommendation. It's going to shorten your provider's time. It's going to shorten the counselor's time. People are going to sit down and say, well, that's what the doctor said. Let's go.
And I think greatly increase patient satisfaction too. I mean, let's use an analogy. Yes. We've all walked into a craft beer bar and looked at the board and just got overwhelmed. It's we have. What do I pick? So I usually ask the guy, I'm like, hey, just tell me what you suggest. And then I usually have greater satisfaction because I feel like an expert. I gave him kind of an idea of what I was looking for. And an expert said, here you go, try this. And I don't know if it's just in my head, but I feel like the beer tastes really good. Whatever he suggested, right? Because the expert told me what to do. Right?
Well, and he said, before he told you, he said, well, what are you into, man? You like IPAs? You more of a sour guy? Okay, great. Exactly. Like, what are you into? Okay, great. You're going to want to try this, and then making a recommendation based on what you want and what your goals are, right? Same thing.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, let's go to the fourth limiting belief, which is it's about you. So I kind of take that to mean, here's the conversation that happens. A patient starts questioning one of our surgery counselors on price, and so they have to try to figure out how to differentiate and say, well, we're better because of this or whatever. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So it's about you, meaning it's about the practice. That's the big limiting belief. Patients want to know what's in it for me. So do your team members. So does every human being on earth. That's not a bad thing. That's just how we're wired. Like, what am I getting out of this? The thing that we often default to is like you just said, man, if people just know how great we are, they're going to come here. And so we just word vomit all these benefits and all this greatness about us. Those credentials and everything are super important, and the patient needs to know those. But when we're the ones that are preaching those to folks, it can sound self-aggrandizing, and it sounds like we're really trying to compare or contrast ourselves against other practices in town. When we don't want to be side by side looked at as competitors, we want to be so far above them that we're in two different leagues. That's what we want to cast. That's the impression we want to create with our patients. And a lot of this comes back to, in our experience, the best way to handle it is the leadership that we talked about, right? We're not just answering questions. We're leading patients down that pathway. We're empathizing with patients. And then very practically, one of the easiest ways that you can do this is by telling stories, right? So rather than just saying, we're so amazing, tell a story of somebody who flew from 4 states away to have surgery with your doctors, because that's how much of a reputation you have, right? Tell a story of somebody who's similar to them that was in the same boat and they came in the satisfaction that they received. When you're just throwing those little anecdotes out, I'm not talking about a 10-minute story, 30 seconds, use a few sentences. You remind me of Sally. But when you're throwing those pieces out, you're able to embed the messages about your practice and why you're so great, but they're through the proxy of somebody else who's already walked the path. Very, very powerful persuasion. And it's really easy to do because you're in the story business. You have stories literally every day of people changing lives, people crying, people like just realizing that you just did the biggest thing that they could ever do. They came, they spent that money with you and had that procedure. So you have the stories, make sure they're being used with your patients.
So what I like in what you just said was, we all met that person who, when you meet them, they're talking about, I did this and I have this education and I did this. And usually we all have the same reaction to that kind of a person. Where if you go and you're just like, hey, what's, it's just somebody who you can really connect with and talk to, you usually have a better connection relationship with that kind of a person than somebody who just word vomits all their credentials. So I think that's, if I'm understanding kind of that's what you're saying, it's do the same thing in your practice, like be that awesome practice that your process just speaks for yourself. And then you tell that through stories and through the experience that they're having, rather than put out all this documentation about us, about the practice. Here's why, because I think that is that's what people tend to go to, though, because I see that let's put this big thing and which is, I think in some cases, probably you want to strategically place that information because you want to see that, but that's not necessarily the focus, is what you're saying. The focus is what the product you provide.
Yeah.
Not talking about it so much.
Well, right. Yeah. The focus really is on the patient. So how can you talk about it in ways to frame the patient? Here's another very practical tip. Just go through your website or go through any of your materials. See how many times you say I, we, and our compared to you and your, and then you switch them. Right? We do so-and-so versus when you come to ABC Eye Center, you will find, like you can just switch those things around and it's very much more focused on the patient. You can do the same thing with your language and how you're talking to folks. But, we focus on you. Our goal is to make sure that you will find you. That's an easy way to do it.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of practices on coaching some of their teams on these concepts. What are some of the things that you're seeing when you engage with these practices? Like, what are some of the trends? Are you, finding certain recurring themes in practices? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah, like in terms of the different folks or how they respond to the coach?
Yeah, like certain challenges that practices are facing. Like, is it staffing shortages? Is it their process isn't good? Are they talking too much about themselves? Like, what are some of the biggest things that you see? Oh yeah, when I walk into practice, I usually see this issue. And, this is something that we have to address pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely. The biggest one we see is what we talked about, the education portion and just flipping that, right? Another one we didn't really talk much about today, but it comes up fairly common, is you want to make sure that everyone on your team believes in what you're doing. And that may sound obvious, like, well, they're here, they know what we're doing, it's kind of a big deal and we're awesome, so of course they would believe in it. But you'd be surprised. That lack of belief can show up in a few different ways. So it can show up as somebody thinking like, man, $10,000 for a surgery is a lot of money. And they're trying to get someone to pay $10,000 for a surgery. Well, that's going to come out in their presentation and how they interact with that patient. So little things like that and we have specific exercises we take teams through to get them over that and help them identify and relate with other things in their life so they can understand like that feeling. But that you want to make sure that everyone on your team believes in what you're doing, believes that it's worth it, and believes that regardless of the reason someone is going to have that procedure, even if it's something that's not important to me, it's important to them, and that's enough. Yep. So those are some of the trends that we see. And once we get teams past that, whether they've got a big sales history or they don't, they really start to increase those conversions and gain a lot more confidence in what they're doing. That's probably my favorite part of what we do with the coaching is, teams will come in there a little bit skeptical, but we get them going, get them some quick wins. And it's like, oh my gosh, I just did this thing. It totally worked. I'm going to do it again.
Right.
And then they, and we make them share their wins with us. And so we get a lot of really good energy going, and we'll take someone who is maybe skeptical and self-conscious about what they were doing. 2 weeks later, they're amped up, rocking and rolling, reporting back their conversions and just loving life. So it's so fun to see those transformations.
And you said something that kind of raised another question for me, is how often do you talk to either physicians or other people than the quote unquote salespeople? Because you mentioned about just having that message resonate through the organization. So if you have a crappy culture and you're not believing what you're selling, then how can you train somebody to believe in the product? So you kind of sometimes have to start at the top, right? Like, hey, physician owner,
100%, man.
look at this, right?
No, you're absolutely right. And I can read a culture pretty good just from talking to a few folks that are there, right? So we won't take on practices who need a lot of work in that area. It's like, look, we got to get this straightened out before you actually get the coaching. You know what I mean? Like we're not going to teach you how to like hold the baseball bat, but if you can get up there and swing and get some singles, we'll get some doubles and triples out of you. Right. Yeah. So, but that's part of it. But yeah, sometimes we get in there and we interact with admins fairly often, and then we'll get on with physicians as necessary just to talk about, look, man, you get this going from the top down, it's going to make it a whole lot easier to get what you really want, which is a full surgery schedule. Right. So we'll get in there and cater to them too. It's a team effort for sure. You're exactly right.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to ask a surgery counselor to ask for that 10,000 that you mentioned, if they actually believe that there's a benefit to the patient and they don't feel like they're just selling something, right? Quote unquote selling. But if they believe in it, they're going to be more confident. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I feel like that's what we focus on in this practice. And anyway, so I want to get your perspective.
Well, one other thing on that note is this is another obvious thing, but make sure that the people working in your practice have watched some procedures. You'd be surprised at how many folks will work for a practice, and maybe we'll get on, we'll start doing some coaching. They've been there 6 months. Hey, when was the last time you went down on LASIK day and watched a couple of LASIK surgeries? I haven't done that. You haven't done that? Go do it right now. Go watch some dude with a beard sit up from the table and start crying because he can read the clock. And then watch his wife start crying, who's standing here watching because she knows that he can now read a story to their 3-year-old at night. And like, that's all the belief and the conviction is just right there, right. But keep that pumping through. Get your team watching stories, make sure that you're sharing and reading reviews to your team. And then when like Miss Sally bakes some cupcakes and brings them up there because she loves her cataract outcomes, make sure everyone knows like, hey, these are here. Look at this thank you note that she sent. That needs to be circulating through your practice constantly building the belief in what you're doing.
Yeah, it's powerful. And I want to kind of round back to what we first started with. It's really not about It's not about sales. It's about patient experience. So it's, everything we just talked about, it's taking care of them and guiding them in the direction that benefits them as a patient and as somebody who's part of your practice, and providing a culture for your employees that they believe it. So really so let's take the word sales out. It's about experience. It's experience. So I like to leave the podcast listeners with resources. So what are some ways you think, if there's a physician owner or a practice administrator, they're looking for some help in these areas? What's your suggestion?
Yeah, I would suggest, like you mentioned, I send out emails probably once a week, sometimes twice a week, to my private email list with this kind of content. So if you like this, you like the stories, you like the tips, to me, that's a really great resource. It's free. You can go over to troycole.com and jump on that, and you can read all the past articles, listen to the podcast that we have. That's all there on our website. And then on social media, Facebook and Instagram, the handle is tcoletx, TCOLETX. I'm sure no one noticed that I was from Texas, but that's what that is. I'm in the Fort Worth area. tcoletx. I'll post short videos and little tips and reels and things on social media as well that are very helpful. I say start there, and then of course you're always welcome to shoot me a DM, shoot me a message through the website, and we'll talk to you and give you a recommendation on what we think you might need to reach those goals you're trying to achieve with your surgeries.
Troy, always a pleasure. I appreciate you jumping on with me today. I mean, talking about the four most common limiting beliefs that are capping your premium conversions. I think it's going to be for some good water cooler talk. So thanks again for joining me.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much. Let's do it again.
I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.